Welcome to the Health Deli, your local stop for a fresh take on community health topics. Come on in, grab a number, and let the guys behind the counter, Mark, Ben, and Mike, tell you about today's specials. Welcome to the Health Deli. I'm your host today, Mark Young. With me today, I have Dr. Mike Klepser.
Me. Did you forget my name?
I did forget. I forget your name.
Here
There's too many M's today. I also have our guest, Martin Covey. We'll talk more about him in just a little bit. And of course, the wonderful Dr. Benjamin Pontefract.
I appreciate you calling me wonderful, Mark. I know you don't normally say that about your guests, so.
Well, no, I just don't normally say that about Mike. That's the one. We're actually on location today. We got the Health Deli food truck out today. Is that what we call that?
It's what we call it. I drove it on out here from Big Rapids.
Good. So we're on location here at the winery at Young Farms in my front yard. So kind of a short commute for me today. You're just happy
but you
I'm
were
not
still
in my
late.
pajamas.
You were still late.
I was late, actually. That's a true story. I was late. So before we get into the topic of the day, which is going to be an interesting topic because it's something that really I'm not that familiar with. It's free samples. What have you been working on, Mike?
Well, this is season 3, episode 2.
Yes.
So I've been thinking of how to do a broader range of topics. And I haven't been able to figure that out.
Okay.
So this year I'm going to talk about leprosy. We've got a colleague that had cancer, not leprosy, breast cancer. And we're going to have her on to talk about her journey, and what it's like to be a patient and processing stuff like that. And then, maybe I'll talk about selective hearing loss so I don't have to listen to you guys anymore.
So how to bring about selective hearing loss.
What?
That's what. Got it. Okay.
There's going to be a lot of what's on that question, on that episode. Ben, what have you been working on?
Yeah, for sure. So actually the next episode that we're going to be recording also on location is all going to be about working out and workout supplements. So it's not going to be the Health Deli. It's going to be the Swole Deli.
I'm working out.
Okay.
Down here.
I'm looking forward to that.
Come on, we're on video.
Mike is ready.
Should I,
You got his guns out.
Guns out.
Guns
Should
out.
I do this
Go
whole
ahead
thing?
Go ahead and flex.
Tear them off. I am flexing.
What about you, Mark? You working on anything?
So a couple things in the hopper. I want to do one on geriatrics.
What's a geriatric?
Stop looking at
treating
me.
older people
respectfully.
So those 65
right?
and older, they have unique health needs, and we've gotten quite a few listener requests to do an episode about geriatric medicine, some advances, some new research in geriatric pharmacy.
Nice.
Yeah, and actually, today's episode was submitted by a listener, so I'd like to thank Abby Greville for submitting this topic idea. We thought it was a great idea and very timely. So let me introduce, without further ado, our guest today, Dr. Martin Covey, PhD. Dr. Covey is a 1996 graduate from Michigan State University.
That's too bad.
I'm right between green and blue.
Oh boy.
He holds a master's degree and a PhD in family and child ecology. He is retired from Spring Arbor University after a career that spanned over 23 years. During that time, he was a program director for both undergraduate and graduate degree programs in family science and family studies. Currently, he is teaching as an adjunct professor for Grace Christian University, teaching an online undergraduate course in marriage and family. Welcome, Marty.
Thank you very much.
Is it okay if I call you Marty?
Please do.
Okay.
Please do.
And Marty, I think you might be the most credentialed person we've had on this podcast. Not kidding.
Wow.
Yes. Had a storied career, it sounds like.
I feel a little underdressed for the situation.
Well, and then also one of the other credentials I bring to this is I'm 65, so I'm going to be really close to that geriatric thing that you were talking about. Newcomer, as it were.
Another youngster on the program. We got to teach these little whippersnappers how to be respectful.
So, Marty, what experience do you have in this area? I've read your bio, but can you tell us about what you've done in this area, in this topic of work-life balance? I guess I need to introduce the topic, right? So today's topic is work-life balance. A little bit of a slant towards healthcare professionals because we are healthcare professionals, but really, I think everyone, whether you're a healthcare professional or not, can glean some information from this.
But in a background to that is it's been really tough, especially since COVID. Healthcare professionals, just so much burnout, so much feeling like you have to be there all the time, and not only from a personal standpoint, but also the resources of saying, hey, we need you there. So this is really, really timely.
Yeah, that's really a compelling position that healthcare professionals are in, because the work that they do is really important, sometimes life and death, and yet you have to balance that off with family life. And so, yeah, that can be a real struggle. I can see that.
Yeah. So what experience do you have? It sounds like you have a PhD. You've taught this for a while.
Well, I think the experience comes from just teaching about human development and family life, the family lifespan, because work is always a part of families, and families have always worked. Historically, they were agricultural families, and so the family worked together, and so the work-life balance thing wasn't necessarily so demarcated as it is now. But as I teach my students, they were often adult students that were already working, and so they would feel that stress of balancing their full-time job and their family responsibilities, full-time academia. And so it would come up, it would percolate out of the situation, and then also as we would grapple with that through the readings that we would do, there would be a topic that would naturally come up where they would say, how do we balance this out?
Sure. Yeah, it's something I personally struggle with.
Well, because I'm looking around. You've got a real job. And then I'm looking around this beautiful facilities out here that you have that you also built and run and stuff. Yeah, you may have an issue.
I might have an issue.
Several issues.
Well, I do have several
but
issues.
have a lot to learn from this episode.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
This is your intervention. Abby, requested that we bring you, on something to help you.
I feel like, though, I alluded to this a little bit when I wrote the script or thought about it. It's balance, right? It's work-life balance. So it's not necessarily taking work off one side of the scale. It just might be adding life to the other. So maybe I don't.
But there's only so much weight. I mean, it's just not like an endless.
I have a
pool
lot of weight.
Yeah, yeah, you do, Chief.
Yeah,
We're gonna do weight loss and healthy lifestyles next.
Yeah, this. I feel like this topic is timely, though. I feel like everyone is talking about it, since COVID. Do you get that or no? Am I just making that up?
Yeah, yes. And some people, I think, do it legitimately, kind of, because, during COVID, even though I was working from home, my work day and my family day just blended together. Yeah. And so as soon as I'd get up in the morning, I'd start working like 6:30, and at 8 o'clock in the evening, I'm still on the computer doing things. And so there was no demarcation between work and family. And so for me, even now, my wife is like, okay, are you on another work call? Set it down. Time to eat.
Right.
So yeah, I've found that it is.
Yeah, there wasn't that line like you had talked about.
Yeah.
One other thing that I think is kind of making this more kind of current is kind of the idea of like hustle culture. So I know you guys aren't the same kind of generation.
Like the dance?
No. A lot less fun. I'm sure Marty has at least an idea of what I'm chatting about. So hustle culture is something that is seen in kind of the younger generations in terms of like, you have a job, but I'm also going to drive for Uber. So I get off my job and then I'm going to go drive for Uber for a
side hustle.
Make a little bit of extra money, that kind of thing.
I'm going to open a winery.
I'm going to open a winery and then drive people from Uber to it, And so it's just kind of picking up these extra sources of income, which again, that's extra work. So you're taking away from kind of that life balance as well. So I don't know if we're going to talk about that at all, but something that at least friends of mine have definitely brought up.
I'm sure it'll come up. So because we're pharmacists and we don't really think about things like this as much as we should, and we like things to be very black and white, is there any kind of like objective measure? Like we like scales and tests and
how many hours should I be working?
This is going to drive you nuts.
It probably will. I mean, is there anything like that? Like that I could say where I get a gold star because I have a good work-life balance? I mean, is there anything?
You get an orange slice.
Well, you could end up with a gold star for sure. Yeah. But the whole term of balance kind of gives a person the impression that once you get this figured out, work is going to balance life out, and once you've got that figured out, you've got homeostasis. It's going to stay there, and that is so not the case. It's a moving target. Balance is it's a process, and it requires vigilance.
So what you're saying is I can't just have one plan in mind and that's going to carry me for the next 10 years. That's not realistic.
Yeah. No. No. In a word, no.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah, I was hoping at the end of this episode that then all my work-life balance issues would be solved, but maybe
he'd give you a ratio or something like that. It's like 60-40. All right, done.
30%.
Well,
30%.
I'm afraid we may end up with more questions than answers at the end of it. But it's important topics that we're going to be hitting on. The foundation of finding a balance is an important task, something that every family, every person should work to achieve, and at least understand.
So you brought up the question, and I think sometimes the question maybe is more important than the answer, right? You got to start somewhere. So who's doing the research in this field? Are people doing research in this field? Who are those people?
Well, my professional organization that I belong to is National Council on Family Relations. And so depending upon the researchers' interests and stuff, that pops up a lot. Then there's professional organizations that are involved with human resources. That seems to be a real topic for organizations. Human resources want to know about this stuff, and so they do their research and produce materials that are important and address this work-life balance thing. And then there's another organization called the Families and Work Institute, where they focus right on that.
You know, one thing you brought up about human resources, I never thought about that, but work-life balance, of course, it affects your life. It also affects your work. Mm-hmm. And so employers would be obviously interested because they want, the most productivity they can from their employees, or...
Yeah, and I think that brings up a really big topic that, again, people have been talking about more recently, which is burnout. So if you don't have a good work-life balance, if you're working 95% of your time, you're going to get burnout. You're going to not be as productive, like you're saying, Mark. You might quit your job, and that's something HR doesn't want, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, there's a
Well,
lot
for
of
Mark,
people.
HR does want him to quit his job.
Depends on, yeah.
It's this job here at the winery that is your wife HR?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she may want me to quit. Yeah. So what are some of those major factors that contribute to this unhealthy work-life balance?
Well, let me see if I can find it on my notes here, because I know I talked about it. Okay. You mentioned the working in an environment that does not recognize or value the importance of family. So your workplace has a definite bearing on that.
Sure.
We were talking before we started recording about some of us have in their interviews and work and talking with prospective employers, they were talking about burnout. And then some of us have never sat in a job interview where that's even hit the radar.
Right.
So that's certainly part of it. I would say another thing is personal inattention. Just not thinking about it, being one-dimensional in your approach to work, and say, this is work, and this is what has to happen. And so I would say inattention or a lack of mindfulness. I suppose you could say that's probably got more traction in the literature now, is mindfulness.
Yeah, and you brought up kind of the workplace's willingness to kind of meet you halfway, work with you on these things. And that's something that I remember, like, my mom personally talking about. So when me and my brother were kids, her workplace was like, all right, you are free to come in like an hour later because we know that you got to get your kids to school and like do these other things. And she liked that a lot. Like she, like everybody, didn't love her job for every aspect, but that was something she talked up a lot. They give me the freedom and this flexibility to do these things. And so,
yeah. And it's impossible to talk for every single employer, but do you think this is okay to bring up to your employer? For me, I would have a difficult time asking my employer for an accommodation because I felt like I was getting burned out. I would have a difficult time to do that. But do you think that's acceptable?
Over time, perhaps. I mean, let me give you an example. I brought a visual.
Oh, a visual.
A visual,
I like that.
yes.
Love it.
Show it to the camera.
One of my favorite books, Mike Mulligan and His Steam Shovel by Virginia Lee Burton. First copyright was 1936.
Yeah,
Wow.
I was there.
Mike, you were in high school.
Yeah.
then.
Well, yeah. I bought it for my kids.
Well, the first time I had access to this, I was exposed to Mike Mulligan and the steam shovel. I was watching Captain Kangaroo.
And so,
I've watched.
who,
I've heard
no,
of that,
who
never
remember? Who, yeah, I was going to say, Ben's just like, why would they make a
who is
kangaroo a captain? But you know, and then we got Mr. Green.
He's got a great military mind.
Mr. Moose and the rabbit. Oh yeah.
Well, the how Mike Mulligan and his steam shovel comes to bear on our topic
Sure.
is, of course, Mary Ann was a steam shovel, and so she wasn't as efficient as the diesel shovels or
Okay.
the gas motor shovels, and so she was out of work primarily. And so Mike felt bad, and he valued Mary Ann, and he always said that Mary Ann could dig as much in a day as 100 men could dig in a week. But he was never certain because he'd never tried that out.
Sure.
And so he saw an ad where a little village was going to build a new town hall, and they needed someone to help build or dig the basement for it. So he drove Mary Ann out to the village. He told them that he would dig the basement for the new town hall in one day, or they wouldn't have to pay him.
Wow, that's a deal.
That was a deal. And it's a charming story. They dig and they dig and they dig and they dig, and he does it before the sun goes down. He's got 4 walls,
Wow.
up and down, straight up and down, 4 corners, neat and square, but he hasn't left himself a way out. And how that comes to bear on our discussion of work-family balance is that you might not go into a job, perhaps negotiating, work-family accommodations and that sort of stuff. But over the course of time, and this is what I meant by inattention or a lack of mindfulness, we get so involved in everything that has to happen in our lives with our work and with getting kids to sports and church obligations and other associations and vacations. And, you could make a whole list of the things that keep you busy. And so it's just like head down, work, 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 work. I got to be here. I got to be there. We got to keep this schedule. And at the end of the day, you look and you say, have mercy. What have I really accomplished? Or is this how I want to be spending my life? It seems like I work like a dog all day long, and yet at the end of it, tomorrow's going to be the same thing. And so we begin to have the need to ask ourselves the question, have I dug 4 corners neat and square and 4 walls straight down, but not left a way out of this basement?
Yeah, and I think that's a great thing that you're bringing up, which is that self-awareness piece. Because I feel like there's a lot of people that feel these kinds of things, right? Like they feel like I'm working all the time. I feel like I don't get enough time to myself. And for a lot of people, it's only once you hit that breaking point that they do something about it. And at that point, it's pretty far along. It might be too late to make the changes you want. And so being aware of that, being in your mind space of like, okay, I'm reaching the point where this might be too much. So how can I make changes now? Yeah. I think that's really, really smart.
No, that's great. I've used work actually as a coping mechanism in my life in the past, where if I have some emotional trouble in my life, I'll pick up extra shifts because work was something I could control. You know what I mean?
Yes,
I could be at work. But it's not healthy long term. I mean, it really is not. I found that out as an age that was not the best plan.
Yes.
Even though I did it, it wasn't the best.
So my question then becomes, work like a dog. Where'd that come from? Because I look at my dog and she's not working. She's just laying around,
Must be sled
relaxing.
dogs.
Yeah, I don't know where that comes from.
yeah.
Because
Andrew might be able to research that for us.
Andrew, let's
Work
get that
like a
and let's
dog.
maybe post that on the website since we've taken your microphone away from you today, which is probably a good thing.
So is the answer then work less? I mean, is that always the answer? If you're feeling struggled, or feeling the struggled, if you're feeling struggle, if you're feeling kind of overwhelmed, is it just, I'm going to work less and then everything will be better?
That would be the easy answer, but I don't think it would necessarily be the correct answer.
So I can tell you from my perspective, you tell me to work less, I'm going to get more stressed. My life balance is going to suffer because I'm going to worry about everything, going on, everything that I'm not doing. And it looks like Andrew has come up with an answer. The saying comes from farm dogs who work from the crack of dawn till the sun sets, and sled dogs and sheepdogs that perform grueling tasks every day. Unlike my dog who lays around barks at nothing and just eats.
Yeah.
Sounds like you need to get your dog a job.
She needs a work balance. Yeah.
Well, I think perhaps a more difficult answer to that question is not necessarily working less, but making decisions on how to achieve, adjust, or continue to look for that balance will require families and individuals to make important choices based on their values. What do I find really important?
So we need to take a step back and ask ourselves those questions then, right? Of like, what in work do I really value? What in my life balance side do I really value? And make those kinds of decisions, which are hard decisions.
Yes, yes. And I'll go back to what we were talking about at the beginning. There is no one formula. You have to keep revisiting this because it's not that sometimes work has to take precedent, but sometimes family has to take precedent. And so it is the wise family that just keeps their hand on the pulse of both of those things. If you have two people in the home that are working, well, then you have two work environments that you have to juggle and the family responsibilities. And so to maintain open communications, understand that right now, work might have to take priority and take precedence, but then revisit that choice after a time and say, is this still appropriate? Can we change something else? Can we back off these things and increase other things?
How do you know if you got a problem? If your work-life balance is out of whack? I mean, is this something you feel or something that your family or your colleagues? I mean, because let's take Mark as an example.
Of course.
As Mark dives into his work and does more things, I'm sure he's just clueless and he's feeling to himself, hey, I'm getting things done. And so and that might be at the work thing. And so he may never realize that he's got a imbalance. I mean, when do you become self-aware of that?
And this is another layer of it after a person, if you want to discover your values, the way that you find these out, the way you become self-aware is through communication. The people that you care for, sometimes perhaps even the people that you work with, will want to speak to you about the time commitment that you're putting in, or they're worried about your well-being, or they just don't see you around the house anymore. Somebody is probably going to point that up. And it takes communication for a family to begin to peel off that onion to know, are we suffering from an imbalance of work and family life? What do we value? What kind of a family do we want to be? And how would we get there?
And that to me seems like the better way to go, because if, this has happened before to me, my wife saying, okay, you're putting too much time at work, spend more time with the family. And I go, I feel like I'm spending enough time with the family. And it's like, so it's your opinion that I'm not there. I'm doing all these things. So having that discussion, to really, if you're in it as a team and as a family, you should be working together to set your goals as a family.
I've done men's retreats throughout the years. And one of the things that I tell the guys is, if your partner comes to you and says, we've got a problem, it doesn't matter whether you think you've got a problem. You've got a problem.
You've got a problem.
And your vote doesn't count on this one. If she says, you've got a problem, you've got a problem. And so it's a wise person that pays attention to those things, because those are the flags that will pop up. And
that's probably a great first good piece of advice. Listen.
Listen, yes, absolutely.
You're probably the worst judge of your balance.
Yeah.
So on that, a couple things. Let's listen to a commercial break. And while we take a little pause
Andrew
here.
said we had to get better at those transitions.
I'm trying. I'm doing my best. Let's try to think about those values a little bit while we take this pause. So let's pause for the Healthy Minute, brought to you by the Winery at Young Farms. Today's Healthy Minute is drink more water. The old saying of drinking 8 glasses of water daily is still a reasonable goal for most people, but it also depends on your lifestyle. Symptoms of not drinking enough water include dark-colored urine, dizziness, fatigue, increased heart rate, dry mouth, dry eyes. Long-standing dehydration can lead to kidney disease and electrolyte abnormalities. Sports drinks and other hydration options may be more palatable than water, but generally are no better for average adults. This was the Healthy Minute, brought to you by the Winery at Young Farms in Mecosta, Michigan. Please visit www.thewineryatyoungfarms.com for more information. Now, back to the Health Deli. It's always nice when I can just set myself up to come back.
That was smooth.
We were hoping you didn't come back.
I think a lot of people were.
But so while you were talking about the Healthy Minute, I thought of another question that hopefully you could talk to, Marty. So you mentioned that it's good to revisit kind of your goals and where your balance is and what you want to do with that. Would you recommend that you actually schedule that? So mindfully be like, every 6 months, I'm going to take a step back and be like, is this where I still want to be? And the answer might be yes, where it might also be something you need to think about. Do you think that is helpful?
Absolutely. Going back to Mike Mulligan and his steam shovel, the problem was they worked so hard and so long that they just forgot to leave themselves a way out. And so if we're relying on communication and understanding our values to help us bring a balance to our work and family life, it only stands to reason that in a busy life, schedule these things. This is an important consideration. I might even go so far as to say partners should schedule like a weekend retreat where they would go someplace where they could relax, but they would dedicate that time to the discussion of what kind of a family do we want to be? Where do we think that we're at right now? Are everyone's needs being met in a fashion that brings them joy? And is there a plan that we need to develop?
I love that idea. I'm a scheduler kind of person.
So
my Outlook, my Outlook calendar looks like an amazing game of Tetris, and I am going to put a recurring calendar invite to spend some time thinking about that, and then spend some time with my wife and my family talking about that.
I put a request in that in my invitation in my calendar like that to my wife. She keeps declining.
That's another problem.
Yeah.
That's funny. So is there a time I kind of phrase these questions beforehand, thinking more about how we impact work, but it sounds like we need to impact work and life. But can working more ever be a healthy change? Going back to my using work as a coping mechanism, just put my head down. Is there ever a time for that, or is that not really a thing?
I think within reason. Okay. I think within reason that might be an approach that a person could use. We had spoken a while back about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and when people were having to work from home, that, Mike, you stated it perfectly. People found it very difficult to sort out when I was working and when I was not, because it all kind of blurred together. One of the difficulties of having so much technology, it's really good because you can work anytime from anywhere, but then the corollary is you work all the time everywhere.
Yeah.
And so again, it's hard to tease that out. And so going to the office to achieve some pressing goals, you might have to do that for a time. But I would suggest having your family on board, that they know why you're going to be gone, that it's a limited amount of duration in terms of time. Just hang with me. This will be over. This is my goal. But then while you're doing that, you need to maximize the time that you do have with your family, where it becomes meaningful time, that you don't just, out of exhaustion, click on the TV.
Well, and you got to be careful, the way you were describing using it, Mark. It was as a coping mechanism.
You're right.
It was helping you deal with a situation maybe that you didn't want to address, but you were looking to avoid it. And that is not a healthy situation or a sustainable situation long term. It may have helped you in the moment, gather your thoughts or whatever, but That's just an avoiding personality. And so now I will take my psychiatrist hat off and charge you
Please do.
$350.
Please do.
That's actually pretty cheap. What was that, a minute? That's pretty good.
That was good.
Yeah, and I think a lot of healthcare professionals this resonates with because they had such abnormal schedules during COVID. I mean, pharmacies didn't close during COVID; they got busier.
And we brought on Derek, who was that infectious disease pharmacist, and he talked to that a lot. How he was like always on call, always answering phones from people. Like,
So, I mean, in those situations, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think communication comes back to communication that, communicating with your family that, hey, I'm going to be working some long hours. It doesn't mean that you're not important to me, but I need to do this right now. How can we all come together and make it happen? That's something that I have been just awful at. My wife is going to listen to this episode. Yes, my wife actually listens to our episodes. And she's going to be like, ding,
Just to see
ding,
what you
ding.
say about her.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, exactly. So does that sound reasonable though? I mean, communicate.
Absolutely. Well, I think a good way of offsetting, if you have to be away a lot, then you have to maximize the time that you are with your family. But the communication should be communications of acceptance. I want to know how you're doing. And I want you to know how much I care for you and how much I love you. And this does injure me that I have to be gone so long, but this is important work. Leaving notes of appreciation and doing special things for your kids, just so that they remember that their parent is engaged in their life and that they really do care, and that this is a temporary situation. But then you have to be a person of your word. So when that is over, you do in fact re-engage in a meaningful way with your family.
Yeah, I will say one technique maybe to avoid that I tried once a long time ago is my wife and I were having a very heated discussion. I'll call it a very heated discussion.
Yes.
And I said, let's just pause and take an emotional inventory right now. Ooh. And because I feel like you're feeling anger.
Is that what that scar on the back of your head's from?
Yeah. So maybe a better approach would just be to simply listen. And then provide feedback at a later time.
Yeah. Always listening is good.
Yeah.
Listening is good. That's a big part of communication, for sure.
All right.
But I that was kind of humorous, but I think you brought up something very important, Mark, which is when you have those kind of heated discussions, you're not in your normal right mindset, right? So taking a moment to cool off and then having those important discussions later. It's important to do that later. But yeah, in the heat of the moment.
In the heat of the moment, no, probably not.
And stepping back from the whole notion of having a heated discussion, that is one of those times when, as you think about it, there was a need being discussed here that I need to be aware of, and I need to focus on that and find out what the root of it is and how I can help alleviate that.
And I think that's why she was angry, is that I wasn't focusing on what she was saying, and I was dismissive of her concerns by saying that. So,
okay, I've heard a lot of things that have been said, and I grew up in a different time than the young fellas here. Back in the day, it was, you got feelings, we don't want to hear about them, sit on them, just pull up bootstraps and get to work. In the communication and just it was different at that point in time. And you look back and like, okay, I can see why you got some problems. But do you find that people of different upbringings, different cultures, different ages need to approach this differently? I mean, obviously they could all benefit, but in terms of how they communicate and what they value, are there differences? So it's not a one size fits all.
Again, I'll just come back to that whole communication thing. Research in family science knows for a fact that a key to healthy family relationships is communication.
Now, is this two-way communication or just one-way? Can I just talk and everybody else listen?
Definitely two-way. Multiple ways, actually. Yeah,
okay, she was right then.
Yeah. And it sounds like another thing is being intentional about it. I never thought about intentionally thinking about
I know you
work
never
life.
think about
I never think about
think.
scheduling time to think about my family. It sounds awful, but I don't think about that. I don't schedule that time to really assess what I'm doing and how that affects my family and how my family feels about what I'm doing and how all of that kind of plays together.
Which is funny because you plan your lecture, you think about your lecture, you think about all that, but you just assume that everything's going to be going on when you get home.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I have a little app here on my phone that's a to-do list, and there's always a million things on it, and I'm like
That's a
constantly.
serious list, man.
Well, that's the smallest it's been. Normally, there's like multiple layers, and there's 40 or 50 things on there, and there's short-term things and things I need. Those are just the things I need to do today.
I've seen
On-
you
on
around
my
here.
list-
I know.
But none of those are assess how my family fits into my life. And it really should be. That should be the number one thing on there.
My list says create a list.
Are you calling your wife right now?
No, I'm screening her.
Oh, because I was going to say
She's
what
listening
you
right now, calling me. I told you to talk to me. She does not speak like that, by the way. That was Ben.
Yeah.
Anyway, do you have another question, Mark?
Yeah. So, what are some, or where can folks go to get, I guess, more resources? Is there something that can help folks kind of start conversations, something like that? I don't know.
Well, they can schedule that retreat.
Okay.
Schedule the time in their calendar when they're just, sitting on the lawnmower or out in the fishing boat where they take a minute to think about their work-family balance. You could the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has a part of their website dedicated to work-life balance.
Oh, really?
The National Institute of Health has some very good resources there. And I did a simple search on Amazon.com using work-life balance as the search criteria, and they came up with over 5,000 results.
Wow.
So there are materials readily available, and it runs everything from a 17-page booklet that's kind of a checklist kind of a thing to an entire program that a family could work through to help them develop that work-life balance. And then there's popular press books that you can read that will talk about many of the topics that we've been talking about today, just to get families and individuals thinking about the whole notion of work-life balance. But again, it all comes back to that discussion of values. Is family important?
Right. Mm-hmm. So to kind of sum this up, we're getting toward the end of our time. Communicate.
What?
And communicate more.
Communicate.
And then schedule that.
Intentional.
And be intentional. That's what I'm looking for. Thank you. Be intentional about thinking about your family life balance or your work life balance. And then when it is time for family, be fully present.
Yes.
Put the work away and engage with your family, engage with your friends. Don't just work a little bit all the time. Am I missing?
No, the last point is really, really salient. That last point, when you could live by the letter of the law and say, okay, well, I'm not at work and here I am at home, but you're not there.
Right.
Your spouse could be right across the table from you and everybody's having their own cup of coffee and you're in your phones.
Right.
Well, you're in close proximity, but you're not communicating necessarily, nor experiencing that family life. How do they know that you care? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that was the most.
I am uncomfortable. For those that are listening and not watching, Mike just hugged me. I need to call HR about that.
But that was a really good point, Mark, about being there. If you're there, be there.
Be there. I like it. Well, it looks like we're out of time, but thank you very much, Dr. Covey, for joining us today. And thank you all for listening. If you have an idea for an upcoming episode like Abby Greville did for this episode, please email us at thehealthdeli@ferris.edu. Thanks for stopping by the Health Deli to sample some of our wares. We're open 24/7 on Facebook and Twitter at The Health Deli, or visit thehealthdeli.com to send us a question or find any of our locations. Please come again. We will be regularly stocking the shelves with fresh content and new wellness specials. As always, we want to give a special thank you to Andrew Tingley and the crew at Ferris State University's Television and Digital Media Production Program. Until next time, so long from the Health Deli, where the topics are tasty, the takes are fresh, and the discussion is free.